The Loyalists are the newest introduction to the villainous armies that we've seen throughout Ninjago, and honestly, they stand out to me in a lot of ways that I haven't seen in a very long time when it does come to Ninjago armies. There is an element of uniqueness to these people, there's an element of strategic nature to them, and honestly it's such a nice refresh when it does come to Dragon's Rising, or just Ninjago in general. We are typically more used to armies that just aren't really the best. Of course all of the armies serve some sort of challenge when it does come to the ninja, but honestly these guys just feel like a completely new breed. And I honestly do just love this. I think there is just so much to the Loyalist army that I think is just kind of gone underappreciated. There is so much about them that I just really do think deserves a lot of praise. Honestly, to the writers as well. Because when it does come down to it, I think they've constructed one of the best armies we've ever actually seen within Ninjago. So that is going to be what we discuss today. We are going to be looking through the Loyalist army, take a look at what they truly accomplished, take a look at how they actually fought against the ninja, and take a look where they could go moving on forth, because I honestly think this is not the end of them, and I would like to know what you guys think of that as well. But let me not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about how the Loyalists are truly one of the best armies. Like any other topic, the best place to start when it does come to characters like this is who they actually are. The Loyalists were a secret society of Imperium supporters and sympathizers of Beatrix, the former and disgraced Empress of Imperium. Led by Dr. LaRoe, they aid the former Empress's campaign to reclaim the Imperium throne by using elemental monsters as their pawns. And this was actually the immediate indication that this army wasn't exactly people to be messed with, because it is the first scene of season 4 where we actually get to see Dr. LaRoe identify the fact that the elemental monsters were beginning to come into the merged lands. It was a very clear and very evident part of the planning stage, and shows that they were smart enough to acknowledge this. They bided their time and they waited for the ninja to cause it on their own. They didn't want to actually play a part in the beginning of the elemental monsters, but they definitely wanted it to be the case. It shows the immediate level of foresight and planning that actually does go into this army. It's not an army that was basically working off of circumstance. They knew exactly what they needed, and they knew that it would happen at some point, so they just basically let time be the answer. And I love that because it does develop them to be able to actually have more in line for their plans. And it just simply shows by the fact that they were honestly prepared for basically every eventuality. Speaking of eventualities, it goes into the other aspect that shows the level of planning that they did truly have. The Loyalists infiltrated and used their positions of power in basically every single aspect of the merged realms. The Loyalists were in every single administration, were in every sort of business, in every sort of realm, and actually had an ability to have some sort of sway when it did come to those positions. They didn't know the location of the Weapon of Desolation until the event of the season itself, but we know for a fact that they've all been in those positions for a very long time, as confirmed by the Grand Inquisitor in Umbra Sylvis. But the thing is that again, it just goes to show that they were prepared. They understood that it could basically be anywhere and everywhere when it did come to this weapon. So they decided, instead of just focusing in on where they believed it to be the case, they took the chance and spread everyone thin to be sure that they did truly have coverage everywhere. It is honestly a stroke of genius when it does come to it. The next point that does show how smart the Loyalists truly are, besides of course their preparedness, is also their intelligence, both in the combat sense and also just in the general sense. They have shown multiple times that they were more than capable of handling the ninja, of handling Beatrix, and also just handling themselves. They knew exactly when to be around, when to not be around, when to reveal themselves, and when to not. There are so many examples of this. Starting with combat intelligence, of course the ninja were weakened this season. They didn't have their elemental powers for most of it, but they're still very competent fighters, and they have gone many times and against many enemies without elemental abilities. But the Loyalists were completely prepared in more ways than one. For one, they knew when to attack. They always attacked within groups, they always attacked when necessary, and they also had the correct equipment about them. They always had the Imperium weapons, and of course they do stand up up against the ninja because they are relatively strong energy weapons, but they also had other bits of technology. For example, with Jay, Kai and Nia, the loyalists utilized a barrier to make it so the ninja wouldn't be able to escape the cave, or at the very least stall them until they were able to get away themselves. They had multiple things that were anti-ninja because they knew that they would need it at some point in time, something that a lot of armies just quite simply don't consider. The other main aspect of their combat intelligence, like I said, comes from their utilization of knowing when and where to actually attack the ninja, and actually when to proceed with a fight. The thing is that on multiple instances, especially when the loyalists had control of the elemental monsters, they actively avoid any sort of combat with the ninja. They only do it when it is absolutely necessary. This is down to the fact that they just simply don't want to expel themselves. They don't want to overexert, they don't want to be defeated because it ultimately weakens the good Empress's army. That is something that she quite literally does not want to be the case. So they do everything they can to avoid it, so the army remains strong once they actually do get to Imperium. And like I said, once they are at Imperium, with the power of the elemental monsters, we very rarely actually see the loyalists fight against the ninja within the final battle. It is always the elemental monsters that were taking up a majority of their time, which makes complete sense. They are much stronger beings and are utilizing elemental power, something that the loyalists just quite simply do not have. So why send in the people who are loyal to the Empress, who are weaker in comparison to an infinite number of enemies that are stronger and are ultimately expendable in the Empress's eyes? It is quite simply a no-brainer, and the loyalists acknowledge that. But like I said, there are two types of intelligence, and when it does come down to their general intelligence, there is one example that shows it above all of the rest, and honestly it's quite comical. It's the fact that they knew exactly when to leave. Because at the end of the season, when the loyalists are defeated and the Empress was unconscious, you actually see the loyalists begin to flee. You actually see them begin to disperse, and it's because they knew the exact moment when it was no longer viable for them to actually stay around. There are a large handful of Ninjago armies that just simply fight to the bitter end, but not these guys. They ran off, and you could honestly argue that this is a case of cowardness, but in reality, I think it's honestly a feat of great intelligence. Of course, the loyalists on their own, without the elemental monsters and without Beatrix and her mech, they're not really going to stand a chance against the ninja, especially when they're flying dragons of all things. So what better way to try and win and get your odds up to the highest than just simply running? By the most part, it was not successful, but what can you expect from flying enemies? But that intelligence is taken one step further, because we do also know for a fact that some of the loyalists, mainly Sora's parents, took the chance to actually hide away for a given moment and change back into something that would make them no longer look like a loyalist. That is again a massive feat of intelligence. They kept their Empyrean clothes with them, because if they switched into those, they'd be able to blend into the crowd. They'd be able to avoid being captured, avoid being arrested. They'd be able to continue on with the Empress's plans. They'd be able to go to a certain monastery where the rest of the ninja and their daughter is. There are so many different options just simply by keeping a spare set of clothes on hand. Again, showing a great deal of intelligence from these people. You can tell that there were protocols on top of protocols, and there were always contingents, because we've just never seen the likes of this, and I honestly just love it. I think all of this just goes to show that when you actually take a look at the actions of the loyalists, they truly are a lot more than meets the eye. There is just so much more competence from these enemies in comparison to others that we've had, especially in comparison to the Forbidden Five. But the thing is that it does just simply work. I like the fact that these are people that are standing up against the ninja. These are people who have plans in place for the ninja. These are people who actually have thoughts behind their eyes. I think it just works, and I think honestly it just benefits from the fact that they are doing it, because I do think the loyalists will go down as one of the better armies we've seen throughout Ninjago, and I do hope that we get to see them again come season 4 part 2. And that is actually the last thing I want to talk about when it does come to this video, that being the future of the loyalists. The thing is that I don't think that this is the last we've actually seen of them. I think we are going to get the loyalists down the line, and honestly, I'm quite excited for that to truly be the case. The whole thing of the Weapon of Desolation doesn't seem to be over. We seem to be learning a lot more about what it could potentially do, because the end of season 4 part 1 does imply this to be the case. Not to mention, in the season 4 part 2 set in the summer, we are actually getting Empress Beatrix within one of the sets. So it does seem to be that she will be returning in some sort of sense. Of course, I could be wrong, but I'm hoping I'm not going to be. Honestly, I'd be thoroughly disappointed if they are just thrown out by this point in time. There was so much established about the Loyalists, and I just don't really think it would be a good idea to simply say goodbye to them now. But obviously, again, I could be wrong. But what could they actually do down the line? Well, for one, of course, reclaiming Beatrix. She is currently residing within the Empyrean hospitals unconscious. It would make sense that the Loyalists would try their best to get her out of there and actually try to help them herself. And beyond that, what would she actually do? Re-attack Imperium? Go after the ninja? Honestly, there is a lot of options here, and I think to an extent it is a combination of the both. I do think she would seek to get back to the Weapon of Desolation. I think she would try her best to retake Imperium, but who actually knows what capacity that would be at? The thing is that they need to have something that would feel more unique in comparison to Season 4 Part 1. So she could have an entirely new plan for all we actually know. Maybe she'll actually end up coinciding with Raz's plan. But I do really think the potential here when it does come to Beatrix is near enough endless. I do think there are many things that she could do, and honestly I hope they actually do it. I think the reason she was left unconscious by the end of the season is a conscious decision. Zing. But honestly, I am expecting to see a return. I don't think her being included in the set is a coincidence. Of course, it does coincide with Season 4 Part 1, but honestly, I think they would have put it in the Season 4 Part 1 wave if she wasn't going to be seen once more. But again, that is just by all accounts a complete theory. But speaking of theories, this is where I do want to pass it off to you guys, because I would love to know. Do you like the Loyalists? Do you want to see them return? Do you like Beatrix? Do you like what they did with her in Season 4 Part 1? Honestly, these are a very interesting group of people, and like I said, I think they have got a lot going for them that a lot of armies just simply don't. I think they just deserve more praise, and I hope this video has gone to show that they certainly have got something more to them than initially realised. Because on an overall, I absolutely love the Loyalists. I love how competent they are. I like how prepared they are, how smart they are, how they conducted themselves throughout the season. They are honestly one of the most enjoyable armies we've ever seen within Ninjago. It feels like there's truly a lot going on with them, and I honestly just hope that that continues to expand. I want to know where the Loyalists continue to reside. What branches of government and what towns and what cities are they still within? Where are they actually still having influence to this very day? Honestly, I love this idea, and I again just hope that they do actually do it. But thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people, and if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of you, your support means the absolute world to me, and I cannot thank you enough. But like I said, that is about it for today, and take care. Okay, bye!